Good morning, everybody. This is Lisa Hill, and I'm here with Shawn for Title Thursdays. And I just want to start today by saying thank you to everyone out there for the prayers for my mom. It worked. So thank you so much, and I love all of you guys. So anyway, we're going to talk today a little bit about Homestead. Do you know what Homestead is? We have the expert right here that's going to tell us.
Well, thank you, Lisa, and also love you, Linda Lou. I'm so glad you're well. This area of law is actually very complicated, so I'm going to be referring to my notes a little more today than usual. And if people have questions, which I think we may get a lot this week, I think we should do a follow-up video in a couple weeks once we have time to fully research everything, because this can go all different sorts of ways as far as how Homestead affects property.
Right.
So the first thing, or I guess the first question is, what is a homestead?
What is Homestead?
Right? And a lot of people think, oh, I live here, it's my homestead, which is true. That's all it means.
Okay,
so
was easy.
As long as it is your principal residence in Florida, that is your homestead. And most people associate that with the homestead tax exemption, which we will talk about in a little bit here. But some questions we get a lot are there limits to my homestead? And the answer is yes and no. So typical lawyer answer, right?
Right.
It depends. So
yeah.
As far as monetary value is concerned, there is no limit on your homestead exemption. So it could be, you could claim homestead on a $50,000 mobile home up to your $100 million Mar-a-Lago estate if you want to, and everything in between. So there is no monetary value. Where you are limited is on the size of the property.
Oh, yeah, see, I didn't know that.
So
that's good information.
And that's something that typically would not come up with title. That would be an issue with the tax collector when you're getting assessed for taxes. But it's governed by where your property is located. So if you're in a municipality, so if you're in the city limits, you're limited to 1/2 acre.
Okay.
If you are outside the city limits, so if you're in the county or unincorporated, you get up to 160 contiguous acres.
Wow.
So you can have a giant farm out in Eustis, whereas in the city of Orlando, you get your 1/2 acre. And that makes sense logically.
So that would be like the people in Ocala that have horse farms.
Sure.
And they have...
Yeah.
Okay.
Because if we didn't have this, you could have one landowner. Let's say you're downtown Lake Eola. You could own the entire lake and all the land surrounding it and call that your homestead and put a little tiny shack on it. And so that would not be an equitable way to do that. So that's why we have those differences.
Okay, well that's awesome. I never knew that. I didn't know there was a size limitation. And
that's actually in our Florida Constitution.
Oh,
so
wow.
It's very set in stone.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. So what protections does Florida homestead classification provide?
We have a lot of protections. So a lot of people, even around the country, call Florida the debtor's haven. And we'll touch on that in a minute as well. But our homestead protection is so ingrained in our property law that the courts will go as far as they can to protect it. And what this means is a lot of judgments or liens against people, those creditors cannot force you as a couple to sell your property.
Right.
So a lot of what we're going to talk about today assumes that the owners or the debtors are married.
Okay.
Because that's really where it works the best.
Right.
So there are several types of liens or judgments, though, that do actually attach to the homestead property. And a lot of these we're familiar with. So a mortgage. So if you take out a mortgage to buy the property, most people assume I have to pay that off when I sell it. Also refinance or equity loans. So people know them as home equity lines of credit or HELOCs. Those also act as mortgages, and those do attach to the property regardless of homestead status. And many people take out the HELOCs, let's say, to put on the addition to the house or to put in the pool. So with that, you have contractors who work on your property. And so if you have a contractor who's doing work they file a lien, which is done by statute. They always do it. It's called a notice of commencement. That lien attaches to your property.
Okay.
So with those three things, we have a general theme of if you have debt associated to acquire the property, to refinance it, or to improve the property, our law is not going to allow you as a homeowner to buy a property, take out 10 mortgages, and then say, I don't have to pay it because it's my homestead.
Right.
Because that would not be fair to the creditors.
Okay.
So that's most of the things that we pay off at closing are those three things.
Well, and I know a lot of homeowners. I just know this from just sitting down on a listing appointment and asking them about their mortgages and what have you. They don't even really realize that a HELOC or a home equity line is a mortgage.
It is, and it's we do a lot of home equity lines of credit closings here, and the closing package is a very different package than your standard purchase money mortgage package. And essentially a HELOC, you are turning your house into a credit card.
Right.
And a lot of times they come with a debit card from the bank.
Oh,
So
wow.
people just swipe it and they don't realize that that is tied to their property, but it does act as a mortgage, and there actually is a mortgage recorded in public record by the bank as to the amount. And so let's say you have a line of $35,000 in public record, the mortgage will show a principal amount up to $35,000. So it's whatever you charge on it.
Wow. Yeah,
So-
that's kind of crazy.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that,
Yeah.
but it is a mortgage. So that does attach to your homestead
Okay.
and does need to be paid off
Okay.
at closing. Other liens that attach are things that, homeowners association and condo associations, and those are special because those attach to your property regardless if there's a lien filed in public record or not. By statute, the association has a lien for the assessments that are owed,
Okay.
which is why at closing we always ask, is this in an HOA or a condo? Because if it is, the first thing we do is order a payoff.
Well, and I do know that back when all of the bubble bursted and all that was going on, HOAs were actually foreclosing on properties also.
That's what I did for over a year.
Yeah.
I worked for the HOAs.
Yeah.
So don't hate me, but someone had to do it.
Yeah. Well, I do know that, and people were like, how can an HOA foreclose on my property?
It's by statute. So with HOAs, you look at Chapter 720. For condos, you look at Chapter 718.
Okay.
And within the first few provisions in the statute, it's presumed that the HOA has a running lien against your property for the assessments that are owed.
This is going to probably go a little off topic, but let's say that your HOA has now filed foreclosure, but you're okay with your mortgage. What happens there?
That's an interesting question. So
I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
No, I used to do this, so I can answer it. It depends on if it's a first or second mortgage. So an HOA lien is not going to beat a first mortgage, and that's also written into the statutes. Otherwise, you'd never have a lender who would lend money in an HOA or a condo if they knew the condo or HOA was going to beat them as far as lien priority is concerned.
Okay.
As to a second mortgage, you can wipe one out using HOA or condo debt
Wow.
as the foreclosing entity.
Wow.
Yeah, so we used to do that too, and that was kind of fun. That part of it.
Everything about our jobs are fun, Shawberry. Come on.
Let's say interesting.
Okay.
So other liens that attach. So I think in a prior video I mentioned Uncle Sam always gets his money.
Right.
So federal tax liens and even county property tax liens will attach.
Okay.
And those, when I say attach, I mean those can be used to force you to sell your homestead property. So our homestead protection here is really a protection against what we call forced sale. So typically, if a person owes debt and that is reduced to a lien or a judgment by a court, that is then recorded in public record. And under statutes, the judgment or lien attaches to any property owned by that individual within the county that the lien or judgment is recorded in, with the exception of homestead.
Okay.
So with these sorts of debts that we're going to talk about now that do not attach, the creditor cannot force you as the homeowner to sell your property to make good on those debts.
Okay.
And that's why we call Florida the debtor's haven.
Okay.
So things that don't attach, things like credit card judgments, medical bills, all of those, if you have those, may show up on title, and they likely will if there's been some sort of filing in the public record. Mm-hmm. Whether you can be forced to sell the property is a question of, is this my homestead?
Right.
And when did it become your homestead?
Right. Okay. And you're probably going to cover this. Mechanics liens, things
Mm-hmm.
like that, do they attach to the property?
So mechanics liens are the same thing as your contractor's liens.
Okay.
It's the names are interchangeable.
Okay.
And those are governed by Chapter 713 of the Florida statute. So for anyone who's done closings, or if you've reviewed title commitments in the past, we'll see a notice of commencement.
Okay.
And that's what the contractor files to let everyone in the world essentially know that I'm putting in a pool, or I'm redoing the roof,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm owed money.
Okay.
And if that is not paid, the contractor then has 1 year from the date of recording to file a foreclosure action.
Okay. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So they can do foreclosure also.
They can foreclose on your property, yes.
Wow. See, I didn't know
So
that.
pay for the pool, pay for the roof. And another protection that Homestead offers us that some people may not realize is, let me get my notes out here. We call it the spousal protection. So
Right.
let's say you and I are married and we own a piece of property, and I die.
Okay.
And then you're going through my things, you need to find a will. And
Okay.
I've willed the property to my brother.
Mm-hmm.
If we were married and that was a homestead, that portion of my will would not be enforced. You are entitled to a life estate, which we talked about
Right,
last
last
week.
week.
So you get to occupy the property for your life.
Okay.
And then my children would receive the benefit after you pass.
Okay.
So even then, against my final wishes, the Florida Constitution goes that far to protect you as the spouse
Wow.
in a homestead property.
Wow. That's awesome.
And, yeah, so a lot of people don't know that.
Yeah. No, that's really awesome.
And one other homestead protection is with regard to property taxes. Mm-hmm. And so this came about during the boom years when
everything was,
when you buy a property on January 1st for $100,000, and then by May 1st it's worth $500,000.
Right.
And people were concerned about property taxes skyrocketing.
Right.
So we have two pieces to our property tax protections here. And if the property is your homestead, from the time that you take title, the property appraiser is going to reassess your property because they're going to see a deed recorded in public record.
Mm-hmm.
So from the time that they assess the property, each year thereafter, so long as the property is your homestead, the assessed value of your property cannot increase more than 3% each year.
Okay.
And that's to stave off skyrocketing property taxes.
Mm-hmm.
And so whether the market value of your property could be sky high, but your assessed value may be low
Right.
because it's your homestead. And that's to help people not lose their homes to property tax issues.
Well, I know back in my appraisal days, people used to freak out because they would look at their assessed value, which was much lower than what the actual value is. And they were like, oh my gosh, this is the value of my property. No, it only benefits you for tax purposes.
Correct.
Don't complain about it. It's all good.
And so since we're talking about property taxes, let's jump down here a little bit.
Okay.
And then we'll go back up. Another benefit is the homestead exemption for property taxes operates to lower your assessed value for taxation purposes. So a lot of people think you get a blanket $50,000 for your exemption. In many cases that's true, but that's not really quite how it works. So you get your first $25,000 automatically. Then you get your next $25,000 up to $50,000, so long as the appraised value of your property is $50,000.
Okay.
And the idea behind that is you're not going to get a $50,000 exemption for a property that's worth 40.
Right.
That wouldn't make sense.
They would owe you money.
Right. And if that worked out
and
that
that's
way,
not going to happen.
that would be great.
Yeah.
And then there are also other benefits. So we have senior exemption, we have disabled veterans exemption. In fact, if you're a disabled veteran, your assessed value is 0.
Okay.
And we just had a closing with a disabled veteran, and I'd never seen one.
Uh-huh.
And I looked at the tax bill and I thought, this obviously is a mistake. So I called the property appraiser's office, and it turns out that I was educated that with this sort of exemption, you have a 0 property value.
That's awesome.
For taxation purposes.
Wow. Yeah, that's good for our veterans out
agree.
there.
Yeah,
I think
I'd
that's
never heard of.
yeah.
Mhm.
I have no arguments with that one.
I don't either.
Okay, so we're going back to last week, and how do the homestead protections and marital status kind of work together?
And they do. And so a lot of times, which I encourage, like we've said before, anyone out there with questions about a property issue, even realtors, please contact our office, because many times the first 2 questions I will ask are the parties married, and is this homestead? And you may think, my gosh, why does he always ask me that? But because it really changes the analysis of what we're doing. So I've broken this down into 4 different, we'll call issues, or different circumstances. So first, we're going to say the deed to the property doesn't have a marital status at all. So it just says Shawn and Lisa.
Right.
Even without the marital status, so long as we are married, you get the benefit of all of the homestead protections we just talked about, even the one where if I die and I will it to someone else. And we actually have a closing right now where that is the case. It happens to be a same-sex couple. One of the gentlemen passed away, and the deed did not reflect the marital status. So after talking with our underwriter, we're able to provide him those homestead protections for the sale if we can provide the marriage certificate and an affidavit that they were married.
And they could have probably taken title before same-sex marriage was legal, correct?
Correct.
So therefore, the deed would not reflect that anyway.
It would not, and that brings me to my next point. You're so good. So that's a good question, is what happens if you and I take title while we're dating, and then we get married, but we're living there as a homestead? Upon marriage, all the homestead protections automatically come into force.
Okay.
So that's how far Florida law goes to protect the marital homestead.
Okay.
And then let's say you and I hit a rocky point, and now we're pending divorce, which would never happen. But let's just say it did, which happens sometimes during closing. So people are in the midst of a divorce, and they're selling property to do whatever they have agreed to do.
Right.
Even if you're in the middle of a divorce and you're living in Ohio and I'm living here in Florida, as long as I'm still living in the property and we're married, you have to sign off on the closing documents, because you have to acknowledge. And the reason for that is, from a title insurance perspective, there's a chance that we could reconcile. And then if we get back together and the property's been sold, now you have a claim against the title.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, so that's why sometimes if we keep asking, are you married? And in the case of a divorce, sometimes we'll ask for the marital settlement agreement.
Okay.
Which some people don't want to turn over. But our underwriter needs to see that, and we're going to have you sign an affidavit at closing stating that all terms of the agreement have been complied with.
Right.
So that way there's no chance one of you can come back later and say, well, he sold this out for me and took the $100,000 and bought his girlfriend a Corvette. Right. So that, which has happened.
Right.
Not with us, thank God, but it has happened before. And so even after divorce, this is a question that we'll get to at the end. This was actually asked by one of our viewers. Okay. So we'll get to that at the end.
Okay, yeah. Perfect. So, homestead, tax benefits versus the occupancy.
And a lot of people think that homestead is just the tax benefit. And it does have the occupancy benefit as well, which we've been discussing. In order to qualify for your homestead exemption for property taxation purposes, you have to be on title by December 31st of the year preceding. It doesn't have to be recorded because the
Right.
deed is effective upon execution. So
Okay.
as long as the deed or the closing happens prior to December 31st, you get it for the next year.
Okay.
So, and we pay our property taxes in arrears here in Florida. So let's say for 2018,
Which is very confusing to most people.
most states don't do it that way. It's,
Yeah, they don't understand.
most out-of-state lenders, we get questions when we're working on our final closing statement of why do you do taxes that way? It's just, I didn't make the rules. That's just the way that we do it.
State of Florida.
So just to give some concrete dates, if you wanted your property homestead tax benefit for 2018, you had to be entitled by December 31st of 2017.
And for all my realtor friends out there, take that opportunity. Make sure that you contact all of your past customers for the previous year, if they bought it as their homestead, to make sure that they have their application in and they're ready to go by March 1st. Because if they don't do that, they don't get the homestead exemption for that year. And then now they're going to pay the higher tax rate for yet another year. So take that opportunity to reach out to your customers and say, hey, file your homestead exemption. I did that with a couple of my younger millennial customers that didn't realize that, no, you do have to file for it. It doesn't come automatic.
Correct.
And they almost, it was, if I hadn't contacted them, they would not have gotten their homestead exemption.
That's a good point to make.
Yeah. So we have to remind them, do your homestead exemption.
Correct.
So, okay. So what are some interesting facts about homestead?
Well, there's a lot.
Okay.
But I picked two.
Okay.
The first is people think that homestead may be a bit of a boring topic to talk about, but there's one case that has happened in the last 20 or however many years it was ago, and that was the O.J. Simpson case.
Ooh,
Yeah.
OJ.
And
We can't ever get away from OJ, can
no,
we?
we can't. And a lot of people have no idea that this is what has happened. So he was acquitted in criminal court for the murders. He was sued by the families
Right.
in civil court, and they obtained a judgment for wrongful death against him for multi-millions of dollars. Prior to that judgment being entered, what did he do? He dumped a ton of his money into a giant mansion here in Florida, and it was his homestead.
Wow.
He was protected from paying that debt back.
Wow.
So my understanding is to this day they've not been paid a dime of the judgment because of the Florida homestead protection.
Because he protected his money by buying a house in Florida.
Correct. So it's sort of the infamous homestead case,
Okay.
Which confuses me to some extent because he was in government housing, meaning the jail in Nevada for how many years recently.
Yeah.
But so I don't know how that may have played out recently, but for many years he did avoid paying that judgment back
Wow.
by hiding behind the homestead protection.
Yeah. That's,
And I do want to take that back to one point which I missed before was one way that you cannot use homestead is if you have a judgment against a property. So let's say you own multiple properties and there's a judgment against you, but you have a property in a different county. You can't move into that property and then avoid paying the debt because now it's your homestead. So you can't selectively pick your homestead. It's got to be where you actually live.
okay.
And so sometimes at closings we've had some savvy people try and do that, and our underwriter says no, you can't.
Right.
You can't do it that way. And also, we did have a viewer question last week from Cassandra, and she asked a very good question about homestead and couples who are buying at closing, but only one of them obtains the loan for the property. And so at closing, when you're buying, or of course you're buying, but when you're obtaining a loan, there are two operative documents that we have. You have the promissory note and the mortgage. The promissory note is your personal obligation to repay the debt. So whoever applied for the loan and whoever used their credit to obtain the loan, they are personally obligated, and they will sign the promissory note. If the property is going to be a marital homestead, the spouse, even though they were not a borrower technically on the note, has to sign the mortgage because they have to acknowledge that there is debt attached to the property.
Ah.
And people get very confused because both documents talk about the individuals as borrowers. The only borrower technically is the person who signed the note. So Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, if you're watching, we need to remove the word borrower from the mortgage because we get that question more than you would think at closing. So that does arise a lot. And that, again, it's just simply an acknowledgement, and this is part of our homestead protection, that the non-borrowing spouse is aware that there are debts attached because, of course, that mortgage, if it's not paid, they can foreclose on your property and force a sale. So it's, again, just making sure that spouse knows that the property is, at that point, in jeopardy.
Okay. And I know that we had that other question too from Jennifer, I believe. And I think we kind of answered her question last week, but she was asking about the investment properties and divorce.
Correct.
And so if it's an investment property and it's a divorce, the spouse that's not on title, it's not a big deal. Correct?
So if it's an investment property, then none of these homestead protections ever come into play.
Right.
Now, if the property was purchased as an investment, meaning a second or a vacation home, then the parties sell their homestead and move into it. Then all these protections that we've been talking about come into play.
Okay.
But so long as the property always remains an investment, then none of these protections matter.
Right, right. Well, so this was actually a very interesting topic. And, when you say homestead exemption, how can that be sexy? Well, we just made it sexy, I think.
I think we did.
I think we did, Shawn Berry.
Good job.
We did it. So anyway, you guys send us your questions. And we're going to come up with a very interesting topic for next week.
Yes, next week I'm going to flip the script on Lisa Hill.
Oh.
And I'm going to interview you.
Yay! That's going to be fun.
Yes, we're going to tap into all your knowledge as an appraiser.
Okay.
And so the video is going to be about educating buyers and sellers about, for the seller, how to best value your property and what improvements may be best to make and where your money really is turned around for you. And as a buyer, taking a look at a property, knowing what you should offer or if the property is overpriced.
So that means I have homework next week, Shawn Berry?
I'm going to give you an assignment.
Oh boy, more homework. It seems like I can't get away from homework.
Right?
Okay, well, this has been a great show today. And so you guys, any questions that you have, please send them to us and let the expert here tell you, get your answers for you, because he's a wealth of information. And this is why I use Shawn Berry for all my work. So you guys need to remember, title professionals, Central Florida, call Shawn Berry. He's your man.
Thank you.
And this is Lisa Hill. And I think we're going to just wrap it up now. Do you have anything else you'd like to say?
I don't. What I will say is if we get enough questions, I think this topic really does warrant a follow-up because I could talk for an hour about Homestead.
Yeah, absolutely. So send us your questions and let us do another video for you guys. Anyway, this is Lisa Hill and Shawn Berry, and have a blessed Thursday, and we'll see you next week. Have a good day.
Happy
Bye-bye.
Thursday.